Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and here is Garibaldi behind me. I'm in Chiavari, Liguria, Italy. Garibaldi was a man of action, a man of ideas, a man of immense moral and physical courage, an author, a man who inspired even admiration and respect in his deadly enemies. He was the total opposite of Donald Trump. He was an author, he was always faithful to his wives, he was broad-minded, he battled for racial and religious equality, he advocated for the rights of women long before it was a fashionable cause. So he was born in 1807 in Nice, France, which is that away, about maybe 70 miles, and he was a sailor from an early age, so he sailed all over the planet, which really made him have a global vision. And he was one of a number of Italian radicali who joined the Carbonari, as in the charcoal burners. And he was a man of the people. He wanted democracy. Again, well before that was a popular notion, the idea that ordinary men ought to have the right to vote. Later he began to think that women should have it as well. He wanted the abolition of slavery and so forth, and an end to religious discrimination against minorities. He was brought up a Catholic that was highly critical of the Catholic Church. So it was in Uruguay, what is now Uruguay, when he fought for Uruguayan independence, the Ragamuffin War, started wearing red shirts that would be manufactured there for use in Buenos Aires slaughterhouses across the River Plate. So he seemed almost suicidally brave, always going towards the sound of gunfire, fighting in causes that were not really his own. Coming back to Italy, and then was the 1848 revolution. He'd hoped that Italy could be united as a republic and become fully independent. It wasn't to be. Writing to the Pope, thinking that the Bishop of Rome might be the new leader of Italy, but the Pope declined. He had high hopes of the Pope elected in 1846, who was rather liberal-minded, but then turned out to be reactionary. So they drove the Pope out of Rome, defeating his Swiss Guard in 1848. But they themselves, the Roman Republic, and he was one of its leaders, one of the triumvirate, had to flee themselves in 1849. And he came here to Chiavari, where his father was born. And so he was taken in by his cousins. So Garibaldi used an assumed name because he knew the authorities were hard on his heels. But going to the house of his cousins wasn't the brightest move. It was the first place the authorities were going to look. So he was arrested and then taken to Genoa to stand trial. He had many hair's breadth escapes. He'd spent several times in prison. And his wife had once, one of his wives had died. He only had one wife at a time during the exertions of fleeing over the mountains towards Venice. So it's in this house that he sought shelter in November 1849, but was indeed arrested. And Mazzini had stayed up the street some similar time. So Garibaldi, incidentally, the name comes from the Garibaldo Valley, not very far away, and whence his family had moved to Chiavari a few generations earlier. Anyway, he went abroad quite a lot. He briefly worked in Staten Island, New Jersey. He visited the United Kingdom and Newcastle. The Geordies hailed him. So he was part of this Young Italy movement. But he was also a pragmatist, and there was a famous moment at Teana where he met Victor Emmanuel, who was the king of Sardinia and Piedmont, which included where we are right now. Saying, okay, you can be king of Italy, and that's the only way we can unite it. We have to unite it as a monarchy. The other European countries won't accept us being a republic. They think that's too dangerous. That's too much of a revolutionary example. So republics always been tried after the French Revolution. France invaded northern Italy, and in 1797, this area became part of the Ligurian Republic, which is really a satrapy of France. And Napoleon was campaigning in northern Italy. Remember, he came from Corsica, spoke Corsu, a dialect of Italian. Napoleon later himself proclaimed King of Italy. Obviously by 1815, there were hardly any republics left in Europe, just very small ones like the Republic of Genoa, the Venetian Republic, which had been absorbed into the Austrian Empire. Anyway, so Garibaldi was later elected to the Italian Chamber of Deputies, i.e. Parliament, and he also believed that areas of the Balkans under Ottoman rule ought to cast off the Ottoman yoke and become independent. He saw Ottoman influences being entirely baleful in Europe. Don't think he had a view on what it was like in the Middle East. So he was a man of republican virtue, like a latter-day Cincinnatus. He retired to the island of Caprera as in just off Sardinia. I mean, the name is etymologically related to the word for goat. So a bit like Leonardo DiCaprio, maybe less popular people knew that his name, DiCaprio, means of goat. Anyway, that's indeed where Garibaldi died. He was personally unambitious. He only aspired to do the best for the Italian people. And he insisted he wanted a cremation and a very modest funeral. He actually wasn't cremated, but he's buried there in a modest tomb in Caprera. Other people would like him to have a magnificent mausoleum, but he was self-effacing. So he won the admiration and respect of even his deadliest foes, a man of unimpeachable integrity. So I don't agree with him on everything, but I'm one of those who holds him in high regard. And here we come to Mazzini's statue in Chiavari, in front of Il Palazzo di Giustizia, as in the courthouse. His friend and rival, who was born 2 years before him, he's born in Genoa, so what's still Italy today, whereas Garibaldi was born in Nice. Of course, it broke his heart to see his hometown Nice ceded to France in 1860 as part of the payoff for France helping them defeat the Austrians. So he fought in a number of wars: the First Italian War of Independence, the Second Italian War of Independence, or the Piedmontese War as it's often known. Was distinctly unsure about Napoleon III, Emperor of the French, whether he was a force for good or ill. But I realised Italy couldn't do it on its own. And of course, a lot of Italians didn't want Italian independence or unification. They regard themselves as primarily Sicilian or Milanese or Venetian or whatever it might be. Might be happy to be part of the Austrian Empire. So some plebiscites were held about uniting with Italy, and there was huge vote rigging in these. They had these suspiciously high majorities for Italian unification. But it being done, then that was it. It was finished. Or was it? What about Ticino, the Italian-speaking region of Sicily? They didn't get to join. They didn't get to join Italy. Did they want to? And Garibaldi, he fled there, was sheltered there for a while. He was a Freemason. Sometimes he managed to use his Masonic contacts to help him out. So he excoriated the Catholic Church for being such a reactionary force. And of course, the Catholic Church says that we mustn't join the Freemasons. The Freemasons say that we're allowed in. Obviously, there was a great deal of hypocrisy. People who believe themselves to be sincere Catholics joining it, or people who believe themselves to be good Catholics fighting against the Swiss Guard, as in the Pope's army. Remember, the Pontifical Army in the 19th century was a serious army, not 50 soldiers as it is today. And it was only when the French army withdrew in 1870, after their defeat by Prussia, that the Italian army was able to breach the walls of Rome, defeat the Swiss Guard, and integrate it into Rome. Though the Pope didn't accept that for decades. He was the prisoner of the Vatican, as in self-imposed imprisonment, as it were, refusing to leave until 1929, the Lateran Pact, when Mussolini signed this agreement between the Kingdom of Italy and the Vatican City, recognizing the sovereignty of the Vatican City over a certain area and a few extraterritorial buildings, such as Castel Gandolfo, paying compensation, allowing, obviously saying that Catholicism was the state religion of Italy, and priests are to teach lessons, religious education in every school, and in return that the Catholic Church would not interfere in political questions. So often in an Italian city you'll see Via Conciliazione, as in Conciliation Street. I suppose we'd say Reconciliation Street. There's one indeed in the Vatican City. So when the Italian state and the Catholic Church reached reconciliation in 1929. So that square where we saw Garibaldi's statue, that was Piazza Giacomo Matteotti, named in honor of the Italian socialist leader who was abducted and killed by Mussolini's goons in 1924, buried in a shallow grave outside Rome, apparently not on Mussolini's orders. But when Mussolini found out about it, far from denying it, he bragged what they'd done. So then people would know that if you crossed him, you would be done away with and you'd be utterly unashamed of doing this kind of thing. So most Italian cities have got Giacomo Matteotti Square. Because when Mussolini became Prime Minister in October 1922, he didn't set up a dictatorship immediately. It was salami tactics. It was step by step. It took about 4 years for it to become a totalitarian state. He, of course, is the one who invented the word totalitarianism, as in total government. As he said, everything within the state and nothing without the state. So although he believed in Garibaldi's Italian nationalism, he completely rejected Garibaldi's liberal values, the belief that there ought to be pluralism, freedom of expression, no religious or racial discrimination, equality for women, and so forth. And Garibaldi, he wasn't into overseas imperialism, but he did obviously cherish a connection with Italian-descended communities overseas, such as in Uruguay and the United States, both of which he spent time in. Anyway, anything else to tell you about Garibaldi? Well, that's him. He died in 1882, if memory serves. He was a novelist too, largely autodidactic, and though he was brought up a Catholic, he did not watch